Good morning, this is Kim Hammer, pastor of Saline Baptist Church down in Tull with your morning devotion. We're going to be taking a look at the rest of Genesis chapter 30. By now we see that Leah has had at least 3 or 4 of the kids, and Rachel's getting jealous, and so she's going to give to Jacob her maidservant that her daddy had given in order that she might have a child on behalf of Rachel. And we find that things are getting a little crazy, as we might say today, as far as the back and forth that's going on between Leah and Rachel in the spirit of competition. I can't help but believe that these girls probably all their life had a spirit of competition between them as siblings, because the Bible's indicated that Leah was not as beautiful as Rachel. So I'm sure growing up that they had a real difficult time in their relationship because one was always competing against the other. And one of the things I want to point out is this, that this thing really didn't get off to the right step in the first place. And, you know, God had made Rachel a promise that he would give her a son. And Rachel and Leah, in the spirit of competition, wanted to take things into their own hands and try to do God's job for him. Now, God had given a promise, and God had not forgotten that promise. And one of the things we need to remember is that when God gives us a promise in life about anything, he doesn't need our help fulfilling that promise. What he needs is our faith to wait until he does fulfill that promise. And when we don't want to wait on God because we think that he has forgotten us or that he is not coming through on his promise, and we start inserting our wisdom and our ways into the scenario, it can really get it like a bowl of spaghetti and just really get it messed up. But yet, in spite of the mess that was being created in the spirit of competition between Leah and Rachel having to have kids, and when she can't, she gives her maidservant to Jacob as though, hey, this is okay. And in our culture today, it does not seem okay. And quite honestly, I don't think it's okay. I think God intended a man to marry a woman and a woman to marry a man, and then they wait on God faithfully to provide unto the needs of their life, whatever that may be. But she got ahead of God and forgot that he had promised her, and so they are having babies left and right between Leah and the 2 maidservants, and Rachel feeling the pressure because she feels the disdain of the public image, the peer pressure of the public putting on her to have a child, and she hasn't had one yet. But in all of this, what we want to remember is that all they did in reality is contribute to the problem instead of help solve the problem. But that doesn't mean God wasn't going to bless it, because out of all this mess that was going on were being born the 12 tribes of Israel. And we find that as they are added on, they're all given different names. Now, we're not going to go through and look at all the names, but I do have to raise this issue. A name means something. And it seems as though that when they gave the names to their kids, and you can go through it and read it in Genesis chapter 29, chapter 30, and look at the names that they gave their kids, it makes you wonder, were they naming their kids so that their kids would have honor and that their kids would be looked upon with favor, or were they naming their kids because it was more about them than it was about the kids? And I think that there's value in the name. And as you go through and you look at some of the names, it almost seems as though Leah and Rachel were naming their kids out of self-serving reasons, not so much as to give their kids the best chance in life by giving them a name that reflected what they would want to have them bear the rest of their life, the significance, the meaning that would go with it. But there again, the meaning of the names of the kids that were given to them, God would take the names of those kids and he would bring about the 12 tribes of Israel. And that gave those kids' names significance because God fulfilled his promise and he honored it through the names of each one of those kids. In spite of whatever the reason it was that their moms named them for what they did, God took those names and took them to a new level because he was going to identify them as being the 12 tribes of Israel. We get over here and we see some of the spirit of competition. This is a little bit humorous, but it does, I think, have some value to it. Reuben's son, Reuben, who was Leah's firstborn son, had gone out in the wheat field. He'd found some mandrake plants. And if you go back and look at the history of the mandrake plant in Eastern culture of that time, it was associated with fertility power. And he brought it home to Leah. And Rachel saw this, and she went over to Leah and said, hey, I want some of those. Now, Put yourself in the position where Rachel was. She had not had any kids yet. She was desperate to have one. She had forgotten God's promise, or the power of God's promise, and she was doing everything in her power to have a child, even if it meant giving her maidservant to Jacob to have a child through her that she would claim as her own. And now, here comes Reuben in with these mandrake plants, and she wants some of it. So what does she do? She barters with Leah, and she says, Leah, you can have Jacob tonight if you'll give me some of those mandrake. Believe it or not, it was almost like a system as to who slept with Jacob, and they took turns, and it was like a rotation system. I know that seems totally weird to us today, and guys don't get any ideas about that because it won't work today. But we find that that's just the way that they thought, and that's the way they worked. And so she traded her night off to sleep with Jacob for those mandrake plants. And I'm wondering if in Rachel's mind she did that because she thought, I'm going to utilize these, and I'm going to position and stage myself so that I got the best possible chance. Now what we're going to find when we get over to the last verse of the chapter, and there's a lesson in this. When we get over there to the last verse of the chapter, you're going to find that God blessed Rachel, and God reminded Rachel that he had given her a promise. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, Joseph. He was not the last of the 12, but he was number 11, but he was her firstborn child. And it wasn't because of the mandrake plant. It was because God honored his promise to her. And it was because God never forgets what he promises us. You know, sometimes in life where it seems like things around us aren't going at the pace we want it to go, and sometimes in life where we feel like we got to step up and help God and do his job, and sometimes we can find ourselves in life in such a desperate way that we're willing to do whatever we've got to do because we're trying to find what it is that we're looking for, that maybe what we need to do is just back up and remind ourselves of God's promises, be still and wait, and God will deliver in his time what he says he will do. It wasn't because of the mandrake plant that she had her son. It was because God blessed her, and God opened up her womb, the Bible says, and he did it to fulfill his promise to her. God's made us many promises. He says, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. He says he knows what we have need of even before we know it ourselves. He said he knows what tomorrow brings even before today is concluded. And he says, I have a home waiting for you in heaven when this life and the struggles of this life are over. My prayer for us today is that we would just take God at his word, that we would trust him for his promises, and we'll see if today is the day that he delivers a promise to you.